So let's start with a little cultural introduction. And I welcome my students who have expertise to chime in as we talk about this in class. Um, I'm a student, not an expert. So one thing that you need to know to start out is that when people in this country refer to China, they may be speaking about any one of four different places that can at times be considered nations, depending on who you're talking to. So there is mainland China, which has its capital as Beijing. There is Taiwan um, and Hong Kong and Tibet. And I'm going to explain the story behind each place as we go along. So the physical features of this land, as what's really important to remember, is these two big rivers which made civilization possible here and have been the wealth of this area of the world for the longest time. And then there's these high plateaus that are mountainous, leading up to the Himalayas, the world's tallest mountains, and some desert-like areas. And this picture shows Shanghai, which is the biggest city in the world with a population of 24 million. And it's on the mouth of the Yangtze River right here. So something to keep in mind, and you'll start to see that this is a theme with every place we study, is that China is not a monoculture by any means. So there's a dominant group culture called the Han culture, and the language of the Hanyu, is called in English Mandarin. And that's definitely spoken all over and is the official national language of mainland China. But each of these ethnic groups has their own language, or sometimes it's called a dialect, depending on how close it is to Mandarin Chinese. So the most well-known in the United States is Cantonese, which is the language of the Yue people in southern China. But Hakka, Jinyu, all these are other languages that are spoken. And in the United States, people have clubs and newspapers where they can speak their own regional language and keep it alive and keep it going. So the written language is really special about because Mandarin and Cantonese, and in fact many languages around the Asian continent, share this written language, which is one of the oldest written languages in the world. So it's originally designed to be written in a brush, and that can create this kind of beautiful cursive or a neater, more clear calligraphy as well. And it's a pictographic language, meaning that each symbol represents an idea, is a picture of an idea, literally, as opposed to a picture of a sound. So over here, men is a door, and you can see it kind of looks like a door opening. Ma is a horse, and you can see the three little feet, in the head of the horse. So the sounds have tonality, and so ma is different from ma, which is different from ma. And in Cantonese, there are 6 tones, not just 4. The written language has 2 variations, the Fantizi, the older style, more complicated, and the Jiantizi, or simplified characters, that's designed to make it easier and faster to write in a modern setting. And in these letters like X and Z, H, that you'll see when the language is translated into anglicized characters. These represent sounds which we don't have in English. Xia, the X sound, is like a tight S that comes from the back of your mouth. So these sounds just don't exist in our language, but it's important to remember when you're seeing them that that you don't want to try to pronounce them like English, because that's not what they are. You have to learn the appropriate sound. And you'll see this character language being used for a lot of different kinds of languages, because since it's a pictogram, it doesn't have to go with any one particular sound. It can be used to represent other sound languages. So I usually start by showing you a little bit of traditional music and then some modern. So I'm going to rock right into that here. And I'm going to start by introducing this instrument called the peepaw. As a little sample. So for extra credit, if anyone would like to look at all the lute or guitar-like instruments that we've seen so far in the cultures that we've studied and compare them, that would be super cool. Something else that's traditional in Chinese music is the opera. And the Beijing opera is a very old style of theater. It's very prescribed and very, very popular. So kind of an acquired taste, but like I said, really popular. And the characters like the Monkey King here are sort of archetypes that reoccur in other cultural narratives. And lastly, some modern music. This is a song about migrating to the north to work in factories and the loneliness of leaving your culture. So it really applies to the industrialization idea that we'll be talking about. Trying to make it start, sorry. 我飘向北方，别问我家乡，高层古老的城墙挡不住忧伤。我飘向北方，家人是否无恙？肩上沉重的行囊，盛满了惆怅，也是最后期望。回不去了远方。空气太脏太浑浊，他说不喜欢，这太混乱太匆忙，他还不习惯。人行道一双又一双，斜视冷漠的眼光，他经常将自己灌醉，强迫融入这大染缸，总是脚步蹒跚，而我都在摇晃。So that's Nami, and you can see the full piece by following the links. And back to our culture presentation. I think I have a couple more. You probably know a lot about Chinese food. Most of us have eaten food, but I think that sometimes an American Chinese restaurant gives you the impression that Chinese food is all about rice. And in fact, in the north, wheat is very commonly grown. And so wheat is a staple, and the wheat is used to make noodles and buns and dumplings and all kinds of cool stuff. And another staple of Chinese cooking, another innovation that the Chinese have given the world, is the soybean, which can be made into tofu, tempeh, soy sauce, soy milk, and all other kinds of products that are so useful in cooking and so diverse in their uses. So just something to think about, that even though you've probably had a lot of Chinese food, there's a lot more to know and a lot more to explore beyond what you can get in a traditional American Chinese restaurant. Little bit about religion/philosophy. I think Taoism is considered a religion, but it's so much a deep part of culture, one of the oldest philosophies of the world, that it's really more of a worldview these days. The idea that you might have come across in different forms is that the cosmos, that the world is formed out of the combination and the interaction between two forces of yin and yang. And that each of these is kind of constantly shifting, and the dominance of each is constantly shifting, and it's never just one. There's always a little bit of the other. In the ancient times, the philosophers codified the interactions between yin and yang as 8 different kinds of forces. And then those 8 different kinds of forces are combined to make sort of 62 states of being. And one of the oldest books in the world, called the I Ching, talks about the way that life flows through these 64 stages. But it's a philosophy of life that embraces the idea that chaos leads to order and order leads to chaos, and that there is a continual cycle of change, and that we are always, on the way to something else. And newer philosophy we've already talked a little bit about in class is Confucianism. So Confucius embraces the ideas of Taoism, but takes them to a level of just studying government and relationships between people, and talks about the proper formation of relationships between people, in which younger folks honor the elders, and people respect their government. And in turn, governments care for people, and older people care for younger people, and so on. So this idea of a reciprocal relationship that's nevertheless hierarchical. People do worship Confucius, so it is called a religion, but again, it's really more of a philosophy, and the worship kind of takes the same form as ancestor worship that is, ancient and all over the world. Buddhism is a relatively newer religion in China, comes from India, and but is very, very widespread in China, and practiced in a lot of different ways depending on where you are. There's many different offshoots and ways of practicing Buddhism. This is the Dalai Lama, which is the leader of the Tibetan Buddhist religion, and we're going to talk more about Tibet soon. So outside of Buddhism, there's a little bit of Christianity. Less than 1% of the population in mainland China is Christian, and also a little bit of practice of Islam. And the Chinese government of recent times has been a little bit more generous about allowing the practice of religion. In the 50s and 60s, all religious practices were frowned on in mainland China. But there is still some very intense discrimination against different kinds of religious practice in China. And that's one reason why people come to the United States, among many, many, many others. So I'm going to separate this video from the history video for the purposes of copyright issues. And